HOA Karen tried to take my farm for a resort. But she forgot who signs the papers. They thought it was over. They thought I was finished. Karen brought the bulldozers. She smiled as my apple trees fell one by one. She said my land was hers now, that I was just a stubborn farmer standing in the way of her resort dream. But what Karen didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that the one thing she needed most, the one signature that could make her dream real, was mine to give. And I wasn't going to give it. Not now. Not ever. Welcome back to HOA Secrets Uncovered, where we bring you the darkest, pettiest, and most unbelievable stories from the heart of suburbia. My name is Daniel. I'm 42 years old. I live on the edge of a quiet little town, and I've spent my whole life tending to one thing, my apple farm. But one woman from the HOA decided that wasn't good enough, and she tried to take everything from me. This is my story. I had lived on that farm my whole life. Every morning the smell of apples filled the air, the sound of birds, the quiet rustle of the wind through the trees. It was more than land to me. It was memory, history, blood and sweat. But that morning, everything changed. I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. Not the birds, not the wind. It was heavy, mechanical, angry. The growl of engines, the crunch of metal against earth. I stepped outside and my heart dropped. Bulldozers, lined up at the edge of my orchard, bright yellow machines with their claws raised high, and in front of them stood Karen, the HOA president, the woman who never smiled unless it was fake. She stood there with her hands on her hips, her sunglasses reflecting the orchard like it was already gone. And that grin, that cruel little grin that said she had won, I felt the air tighten in my chest. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't another petty fine about my mailbox or my fence. This was war. Karen raised her hand, and the first bulldozer roared to life. The ground shook as it rolled forward, and the blade tore into the soft dirt where my trees had stood for generations. I shouted, I ran forward, but she didn't flinch. She just turned her head and smiled at me as if this was all some game, as if my pain was her entertainment. "Your farm is over," she said, her voice sharp, cruel, final. "This land is perfect for the resort, and you're just in the way." I wanted to grab her, to shake her, to scream at the madness, but I stopped myself, because I saw something in her hand. Papers, stacked thick and crisp. She waved them in my face. "HOA voted," she said. "We have authority, and the development is already approved." Her words cut deeper than the bulldozer's blade. But I didn't move, I didn't shout, I didn't beg, I only stared at her, and let the silence hang between us, because deep inside, I knew something she didn't. She thought she had won. She thought she had crushed me. But she didn't know the truth about those papers. She didn't know that the final approval, the one thing that could turn her dream into reality, still needed one last signature, mine. I looked past her, at the machines tearing the edge of my orchard, at the men in vests marking the land like it was already sold, and then back at her, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, drunk on her own power. For a moment I almost laughed, because all her planning, all her scheming, all her greed would lead her straight to me. And when that moment came, I would be ready. But in that moment, standing there with the sun beating down and the roar of bulldozers drowning out my heartbeat, I let her think she had won, because sometimes silence is sharper than words. Sometimes letting your enemy dance makes the fall even harder. Karen turned away. She barked orders at the workers, and they moved like soldiers in her private little army. Every stomp of their boots felt like an insult. Every tree marked with spray paint felt like a wound. My orchard wasn't just trees, it was life. It was my father's hands planting the first sapling. It was my mother's laughter as she carried baskets of apples into the house. It was my childhood, my present, my future. And she wanted to turn it into a resort spa with fountains and golf carts. I clenched my fists, I felt the dirt under my nails, and I swore to myself right then, she was not going to win. The day dragged on. The machines didn't stop, but neither did I. I walked through the orchard, watching every cut, every fallen branch, and I burned it into my memory, because every moment of destruction would become fuel for what was coming. Karen strutted around like she owned the place, her clipboard in hand, her sunglasses hiding her eyes but not her arrogance. She whispered to her investors. She bragged about how soon construction would start. She called me stubborn, old-fashioned, a fool stuck in the past. But I said nothing, not yet, because the real game hadn't even started, and when it did, the ending would not be hers. I stood there until the sun dipped low, until the machines went silent, until the workers packed up and left. Karen lingered a little longer, watching me like a cat watches a cornered mouse. Then she smirked, climbed into her shiny SUV, and drove off. And I was left alone with the broken earth, the stumps, the silence. But that silence didn't scare me. It steadied me. It reminded me that sometimes the storm only makes the roots grow deeper, and mine ran deeper than she could ever imagine. That night, as I sat on my porch staring at the half-destroyed orchard, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a spark, a fire, the beginning of something greater. Because the truth was simple, Karen thought she had all the power, but she was about to learn. That real power doesn't come from loud voices or fake papers. It comes from patience, from silence, from the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, I would not miss. So let me ask you something. If your land, your memories, your entire life's work was threatened by someone drunk with power, would you stay quiet like I did? Or would you fight back right away? The next morning the neighborhood felt different. The air was heavy, like everyone knew something had happened, but no one wanted to say it out loud. When I walked to the mailbox, I could feel their eyes on me, neighbors standing in their driveways, pretending to water plants, pretending to read newspapers, but really watching me, watching the man whose land had just been torn apart. Some of them smiled politely, some looked away, and a few whispered to each other when I passed. But I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what they were saying. Karen finally got him. About time that farm got cleared. She always wins. And maybe to them it was true, because in our neighborhood, Karen was untouchable. She was the queen of the cul-de-sac, the self-appointed ruler of our perfect little suburb. Her voice echoed in every meeting, her face smiled from every newsletter, her signature stained every letter shoved under our doors. She wore bright red lipstick and pearls that caught the sun. She always carried a clipboard, and no one had ever seen her without it. It was like her weapon, her shield, her crown all in one. People laughed at her rules at first. Lawn grass must be exactly 3 inches. Garbage bins only on the curb between 7 and 7:15. Holiday lights no later than January 3rd. And heaven forbid you painted your door the wrong shade of beige. But the laughter never lasted, because those who laughed too loud soon found fines in their mail, warnings stapled to their doors, and sometimes even legal letters, until one by one, the laughter stopped and everyone obeyed, everyone except me. Maybe that's why she hated me most. I didn't fight her, but I didn't bow to her either. I just lived my life on my land, the way my father had, and every time she passed by my orchard, every time she saw me working the fields, I knew it burned her inside, because I wasn't under her thumb. So when she wanted more power, more control, when her eyes searched for her next conquest, she didn't look at a neighbor's lawn or mailbox. She looked at me, at my orchard, at the land she could never tame, and once she set her sights on something, she never let go. I still remember the first letter she sent me about the farm. It wasn't even about the trees. It was about the fence. Too high, she said, against regulations. But the fence had been there since before I was born. My father built it with his own hands, and suddenly, it was illegal. When I ignored her letter, she sent another, this time about unauthorized farming activity. Apparently, growing apples in your own backyard was a violation. She claimed the scent of blossoms disturbed the peaceful harmony of the neighborhood, as if the smell of flowers was a crime. But that wasn't the end. Oh no. Next came complaints about noise, about unsightly clutter from harvest baskets, even about wildlife attraction because birds dared to land on my branches. Every excuse she could find, she used, and still, I stayed quiet because I knew every letter, every warning, every ridiculous fine wasn't really about the rules. It was about breaking me, and I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. But then came the day she showed up at my door with a fake smile plastered across her face. Behind her were two men in suits. Investors, she called them. She handed me glossy papers with images of fountains, tennis courts, and luxury cabins. Her eyes glittered as she described it. The resort of the future. The jewel of the neighborhood. And right in the middle of her colorful little brochure was my orchard. She didn't even blink when she said it. She wanted my land, my farm, my history, flattened and paved for her dream. I laughed in her face that day, not out of humor, but disbelief. How could someone be so blind, so heartless, so greedy? She didn't laugh back. She only leaned in close, her perfume sickly sweet, her voice low and sharp. You will give me this land. And then she turned and walked away, like it was already done. From that day forward, her smile grew bigger at every meeting, her voice louder, her clipboard heavier. She rallied neighbors with promises of a spa and pool memberships. She whispered that property values would rise, that it was for the good of the community, and slowly, one by one, people nodded their heads, even the ones who once pitied me, even the ones who knew better. It was her greatest trick. She made them believe her greed was their gain, and so, when the bulldozers came, I wasn't surprised, because by then, Karen didn't just think she had the power, she believed she was the power. But power is a strange thing. It doesn't always live where people think it does. And while she paraded around as queen of the cul-de-sac, holding her fake papers and empty promises, I kept my silence because I knew something she didn't. Something no one in that neighborhood had bothered to ask. Who really controlled the land permits for this town? The truth was, I did. And the day she discovered it would be the day her kingdom crumbled. So let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, living under an HOA president who acted like a queen, who thought she owned not just the neighborhood, but your very life, would you obey her rules to keep the peace? Or would you stand quiet like me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The first warning came quietly, folded into a white envelope, tucked under my door like a thief's note. No knock, no voice, just paper, with the HOA seal stamped in red across the top. I tore it open and read slowly. Violation. Unauthorized modifications to property fence. It said my fence was too high, too wide, too inconsistent with community standards. I laughed out loud when I read it. That fence had stood there for 30 years. It had weathered storms, winters and summers. It had kept coyotes out and my family safe. And now, suddenly, it was a crime. I tossed the letter onto the table and thought nothing more of it. But Karen wasn't finished. The next week, another letter came. This time the words were sharper. Unauthorized farming activity. Apparently my apple trees were not aesthetically aligned with the neighborhood. I sat on the porch holding that letter, and the smell of apple blossoms drifted across the yard. The bees buzzed lazily in the sunlight. And I thought, how could anyone hate this? How could anyone look at beauty and call it a violation? But I knew the answer. It wasn't about the trees. It was about me. And Karen wasn't just sending letters anymore. She was setting traps. Soon the fines started. Slips of paper left in my mailbox. $50 here, $100 there. Each one signed with her looping perfect signature. Then came the whispers from neighbors that my farm brought wild animals, that my baskets were unsightly clutter, that my tractor made too much noise. It felt like the walls were closing in, every rule twisted against me, every detail weaponized, and always, it came back to her. One night, I caught her standing at the edge of my orchard, clipboard in hand, writing in the dark with a flashlight beam dancing across the trees. She didn't even flinch when I called her name. She only turned, smiled that cold smile, and said, "Documenting violations." Then she walked away as if she owned the earth under her feet. I wanted to chase her, to rip the papers from her hands. But something stopped me. Because the more I watched her, the more I understood her. She wasn't doing this for the rules. She wasn't even doing this for the HOA. She was doing it for herself, for the thrill of control, for the power of watching others bend and break, and she thought I would break too. The next warning wasn't even a letter. It was her voice at the town meeting, her chair at the front of the room like a throne, her lips painted scarlet as she leaned into the microphone. She pointed at me in front of everyone, called my orchard unsafe, said it was outdated, and holding back progress. The crowd murmured, some nodded, some looked uncomfortable, and some simply stared at me with pity, like I was already lost. I sat there silently. Let her talk, let her poison spread, because I knew the more she spoke, the more she revealed her hunger, and the hungrier she became, the sloppier she would be. When the meeting ended, she cornered me in the hallway, her heels clicking against the tile, her perfume choking the air. She leaned in close, her voice low and sharp like a knife. "You can't win," she whispered. "You will give me this land, one way or another." Then she walked away, and her laughter echoed through the empty hall. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the orchard through my window. The moonlight silvered the branches, the blossoms glowed like ghosts, and I felt the weight of every generation before me pressing down. This farm wasn't just mine, it was my father's, and his father's before him. It was legacy, it was memory, it was survival. And no letter, no fine, no false queen with a clipboard was going to erase it. But still, I wondered, how far was she willing to go? How deep did her greed run? And how much destruction would she cause before she realized the truth, that no matter how many letters she wrote, no matter how many warnings she sent, the power she wanted so badly still rested in my hands, and I wasn't going to give it away the day the bulldozers came. I knew it before I even opened my eyes. The ground shook in my sleep. The rumble of engines rolled through the walls of my house. And when I stepped outside, my worst fears stood in front of me, bright yellow machines lined up along the edge of my orchard, massive claws raised like monsters from some nightmare, and behind them, Karen. She stood there like a general before battle, her sunglasses flashing in the sun, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a crown jewel, and that smile, that sharp little smile that said this was victory. I froze for a moment, the orchard stretched out behind me, every tree planted by hand, every branch a memory of my family. And now, it was about to be torn apart. Karen didn't even wait for me to speak. She waved her hand, and the first bulldozer roared to life. The ground trembled as it rolled forward. The blade lowered, slicing into the earth. The first row of apple trees shook, roots snapping, branches splitting. The sound was sickening, like bones breaking. I shouted, but no need listened. The workers kept moving, the machines kept tearing, and Karen just stood there smiling, like she was watching a show made only for her, I ran toward her, anger boiling in my chest, but before I reached her, two men in suits stepped in front of me, investors, the ones she had promised her golden resort to. They blocked my path, cold eyes, expensive watches, no emotion at all to them. This wasn't my life. This was just business. I tried to push past them, but Karen raised her hand. "Careful," she said, her voice calm and cruel. "You wouldn't want to make things worse for yourself. Worse." As if ripping out my family's legacy wasn't already the worst, I looked over her shoulder. At the machines tearing through the orchard, apples scattered across the dirt, birds fleeing into the sky, branches cracking under the weight of steel. It was destruction. It was loss. It was war. But through all of it, I stayed silent, because while she thought she had already won, she didn't know the truth. Karen pulled a stack of papers from her clipboard. She waved them at me like some holy script. "HOA voted," she said. "The board is behind me. The community is behind me. And now, this land is mine." Her words echoed across the field, cold, final, sharp as glass. But I saw something in her eyes. Not victory, not certainty, but hunger. The hunger of someone who had taken too much for too long and didn't know when to stop. I leaned closer, my voice steady, low. "This land isn't yours." Her smile faltered for half a second, but she recovered quickly. "Not yet," she whispered. "But it will be." The bulldozers tore through another row of trees. The sound of roots ripping from the soil made my chest ache. I wanted to scream, to fight, to throw myself in front of the machines. But I didn't. I just stood there, and I let her believe she had power, because deep down, I knew something she didn't. The papers she waved around were nothing without me. Her resort, her dream, her empire of fountains and tennis courts, all of it still needed one thing, one simple piece of ink, my signature, and she would never get it. As the sun burned above us, the machines kept moving, the men in suits kept watching, and Karen kept smiling like the queen she thought she was. But inside, I was calm, because every tree they tore down, every branch they snapped, every wound they left in the earth was a reminder of what was mine and what I would never give to her. When the machines finally shut down for the day, the orchard looked broken, stumps jutted from the ground like bones, the air smelled of fresh-cut wood and gasoline, and silence settled heavy over the land. Karen walked toward her car, her heels clicking against the dirt like she was walking on marble. She turned back once, her sunglasses slid down just enough for me to see her eyes, sharp, proud, hungry. "You can't stop progress," she said softly. Then she drove away. But she was wrong, because this wasn't progress. This was theft, and no thief walks away forever. That night I sat on the porch. The stars hung above the broken orchard, and I made myself a promise. She would regret the day she brought bulldozers to my land because she thought this was the end. But really, it was only the beginning, and so I wonder, if someone stood in your yard with bulldozers tearing apart everything you loved, smiling as if your life was nothing but dirt under their boots, would you run at them in rage, or would you stay quiet, letting them think they had won, while you held the real power in your hands? The morning after the bulldozers, I didn't sleep. The air still smelled of torn wood and gasoline, like the orchard itself was bleeding. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. The crack of roots snapping, the thud of trees falling, Karen's laughter echoing like some cruel hymn of victory. But that morning, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt sharp, cold, dangerous. Karen thought the bulldozers were the end of me. She thought she had ripped the heart out of my land, my family, my life. But what she didn't understand is that sometimes when you take too much from a man, you don't weaken him, you make him unstoppable. So I made coffee, black, bitter, and I began my pushback. The first step was simple. I went to the HOA meeting. Normally those meetings were a circus. Neighbors arguing about mailbox colors, lawn heights, and the number of ducks allowed in the pond. Karen always sat at the head, perched on her throne of authority, gavel in hand, the board members nodding like puppets. But this time, I walked in carrying a box heavy enough to make every head turn. Karen's smile cracked the second she saw me. "Oh, look who decided to join us," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. The others chuckled nervously, waiting for her cue to laugh louder. I didn't sit. I didn't even greet anyone. I placed the box on the table and pulled out the first folder. Documents, photos, audio recordings, emails. Karen's eyes flickered. Just a flicker. But I saw it, the flash of recognition. I spoke calmly, but my words cut through the room like glass. These are records of every decision made under this HOA for the past 3 years, every inflated budget, every contractor chosen without bids, every special fee that ended up in accounts linked to, well, let's just say, not the community. The room went dead quiet. Karen opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a recording device. Her voice played out loud, sharp, arrogant. "I don't care what the budget says. Push it through. They'll pay. They always pay." Gasps echoed around the room. The board members shifted in their seats. Karen's face drained of color. But still, she tried to smile. "Fake," she said quickly. "That's fake. Manufactured." I leaned forward, my voice calm, steady. "Then maybe you should explain it to the county inspector I spoke with yesterday, or the reporter who called me this morning, or better yet, the lawyer I'm meeting tomorrow." Her smile broke then. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind those sunglasses. But I wasn't done. Later that week, I put up signs around the neighborhood. Not flashy, not loud, just simple words. "Do you really know where your HOA money is going?" Beneath the words, I listed a meeting time and place. Not the HOA office, not Karen's fortress, but the town library, neutral ground. Dozens showed up, neighbors who had whispered for years but never dared to speak, families who had been fined for ridiculous reasons, elderly couples who had nearly lost their homes to Karen's endless fees. They were angry. They were ready. And that night, for the first time, Karen wasn't the queen of the room. I was. I spoke with fire. I spoke with evidence. And I watched as her empire of fear began to crumble. But Karen wasn't done either. 2 nights later, I came home to find my mailbox ripped out of the ground, my fence slashed, my car windshield cracked. A warning. And on my porch, taped to the door with bright red duct tape, a single piece of paper. Big, bold letters. Stop. No signature. No name. But I knew who it was from. Karen wasn't going to back down. She was going to fight dirtier than ever. And strangely, that thrilled me. Because, see now, it wasn't just about trees or land or money. It was war. Her corruption against my resolve, her greed against my fury. And I was ready. The next HOA meeting came faster than I expected. Karen strutted in, heels clicking, eyes hidden behind dark shades. But this time, people didn't look at her. They looked at me. They whispered when she spoke. They shook their heads when she smiled. Her empire wasn't gone. Not yet. But the cracks were there. And cracks, no matter how small, always spread. That night, she leaned close to me as everyone filed out. Her perfume was sharp, suffocating, like poison in the air. "You think you've won?" she whispered, her voice venom. "But I don't lose. Ever." I met her eyes, calm, cold, and I whispered back, "Everyone loses eventually." She didn't smile. Not this time. She just walked away, her heels digging into the floor like nails on a coffin. I knew then. This wasn't over. This was just the opening round. She still had power, money, and control. But I had something she didn't: truth and a community that was finally ready to see her for what she was. The bulldozers had destroyed my orchard. But in their place, I was building something stronger. And that night, as I sat in the silence of my broken land, I asked myself a question. If someone was tearing apart your life piece by piece, smiling as they did it, would you fight them with raw fury? Or would you fight them with patience, precision, and truth, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? I thought the worst was over. I thought exposing her lies, revealing her schemes, would be enough to break Karen's grip on the neighborhood. But Karen didn't break. She adapted. She twisted. She retaliated. The first strike came quiet, like a shadow slipping under a locked door, a letter, folded crisp, tucked into my mailbox. Not an HOA fine, not a notice, something darker. It was a legal summons. According to Karen, I was now in violation of unauthorized land use. She claimed I was operating a commercial farm on residential property. She said my orchard had been an illegal business all along. The irony made me laugh at first. The orchard she destroyed. Now she said it shouldn't have existed in the first place. But when I called my lawyer, his tone wasn't amused. "This isn't a joke," he said. "She's trying to bury you under technicalities. Even if it's baseless, it could drag for months, years, and it could cost you everything." My hands shook when I hung up the phone. It wasn't just my land anymore. It was my future, my livelihood, my sanity. The second strike wasn't quiet. It was loud, very loud. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to flashing lights outside, police cars, 2 of them, parked at the end of my driveway. I stumbled out, half asleep, only to be met with blinding beams of flashlights and stern voices. "Sir, we received reports of illegal storage of chemicals on your property." Chemicals, me. The man who grew apples with nothing more dangerous than fertilizer and rainwater. I let them search. Of course I did. I had nothing to hide, but the embarrassment, the neighbors watching from their windows, the whispers spreading like fire. That was the point. When the officers finally left, apologizing under their breath, I saw her, Karen, standing across the street in her silk robe, arms folded, a smile curling at her lips. And then came the third strike, the one that almost broke me, a notice taped to my door, not from the HOA this time, from the bank. My mortgage had been flagged for review due to community instability and pending litigation. Someone had called them. Someone had pushed for my financials to be questioned, and I didn't need a name to know who it was. Karen wasn't trying to win. She was trying to crush me, to grind me into dust until I couldn't fight back anymore. But here's the thing about me. I don't scare easy. I had been through droughts, storms, infestations, bad seasons where every tree seemed cursed. And I had survived all of it, so no matter how many papers she filed, no matter how many cops she sent, no matter how many whispers she spread, I wasn't going to stop. In fact, her retaliation only sharpened my resolve. The next HOA meeting was chaos. Word had spread about the cops at my house, about the lawsuit, about the bank review. Karen sat tall at the head of the table, radiating smugness. She thought the rumors had turned the neighborhood against me, but when I stood up, holding another stack of papers, the room leaned in. This time, I didn't just talk about Karen, I talked about all of them. Every family fined for grass an inch too high. Every old man threatened with foreclosure over a cracked driveway. Every mother forced to remove her child's swing set for being unsightly. I didn't show evidence this time. I didn't need to. I told their stories. Their voices echoed through mine, and for the first time, they saw themselves not as isolated victims, but as a community united against her. Karen slammed her gavel. "Order!" she barked. "None of this is relevant. This is personal. This is slander." But the voices didn't stop. They grew louder. One neighbor stood up, then another, until Karen's voice was drowned out by their anger. That night, as people left the hall, Karen cornered me in the parking lot. Her face wasn't smug anymore. It was twisted, ugly. Her mask had cracked. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You think you can beat me? But I have more power than you can imagine. You're one man, I'm the board, and I will ruin you." I looked her dead in the eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt pity. "Karen," I said softly, "you already ruined me when you bulldozed my farm. But the thing about ruins is, sometimes they're the strongest foundations." Her jaw clenched, her hands balled into fists. She wanted to scream, to slap me, to unleash her fury right there under the yellow glow of the parking lot light. But she didn't. She just turned and walked into the darkness. At home, I sat in silence. The orchard was gone. The land was scarred, my future uncertain. But the people were waking up. The board was trembling. And Karen, she was running out of weapons. The retaliation had been brutal, but I was still standing, still breathing, still ready, and the question gnawed at me as I sat in the empty night. If you were me, would you keep fighting a woman this ruthless until the very end? Or would you walk away before she drags you into something far darker than you ever imagined? The night before the final vote, I barely slept. The air felt heavy, charged, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Every streetlight flickered as if even the power grid knew something was about to break. Karen had thrown everything at me, the lawsuits, the cops, the bank calls, the threats. And still, I was standing. But this last meeting wasn't just another argument. It wasn't just another round of her games. This one would decide who controlled the board, who controlled the neighborhood, who controlled everything. When I walked into the community hall, it was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls whispering, eyes darting from me to Karen and back again. Karen sat at her throne at the head table, gavel in hand. Her smile stretched thin like brittle glass. But her eyes told a different story. Cold, nervous, desperate. I didn't sit. I walked straight to the front. I placed my folders on the table, and I looked every single neighbor in the eye. "This is it," I said, my voice low but clear. "Tonight, we decide if this community belongs to us or to her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen slammed her gavel. "Order! Order! This meeting is not about personal grievances. This meeting is about maintaining the standards of our community." I let her speak. I let her drone on about rules and fines and preserving property value. And then I dropped the hammer one by one. I laid out the final stack of evidence. Not rumors, not whispers. Hard proof. Invoices padded with fake expenses. Checks signed to companies that didn't exist. Board decisions made without votes, without records. Thousands, tens of thousands of dollars gone straight into Karen's pockets. Gasps filled the room. Some neighbors shouted, others cursed. But I didn't stop there, because I had saved the best for last. I played one final recording, Karen's voice, sharp, smug, cruel. "They'll pay. They always pay. And if they don't, I'll take their homes, one by one." The room erupted. People stood. People pointed at her, their voices breaking through years of silence and fear. "You threatened me. You stole from us. You ruined my father's retirement." Karen tried to bang her gavel, tried to scream over them, but her voice was lost in the storm she had created. And then the motion came, not from me, from a neighbor I barely knew, a quiet man who had never spoken at a meeting before. I moved to remove Karen as president of the HOA effective immediately. The crowd roared in agreement, hands shot into the air, one after another, a tidal wave she couldn't stop. The board hesitated, shuffled papers, looked at Karen. But they knew, they saw the writing on the wall. The vote passed, unanimous. Karen was finished, her face in that moment. I will never forget it. Not anger, not fury, not even shame. It was shock, like a queen stripped of her crown in the middle of her court, like she couldn't believe that the people she had ruled with an iron fist had finally broken free. She stood up. Her chair screeched against the floor. She pointed at me, her finger trembling. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You don't know what you've started." But her voice cracked, and the power in her words was gone. She stormed out of the hall, the crowd jeering behind her, and just like that, the empire of HOA. Karen collapsed. After the meeting, people surrounded me. Some shook my hand, some hugged me, some just looked at me with tears in their eyes, as if I had pulled them out of a nightmare they thought would never end. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive again. And yet, as I walked home under the cool night sky, I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence of my land still pressed on me. The orchard was gone, the trees were gone, the farm was gone. Karen was finished, but victory tasted strange, because justice had come, but it hadn't restored what I had lost. A week later, I stood on the scarred soil of my orchard. The bulldozers had left behind nothing but broken stumps and dirt. But the air was clean now, quiet, free. Neighbors had offered to help replant. The board had promised compensation. The town had even reached out about restoring farmland. But I wasn't sure. Maybe this wasn't about replanting trees anymore. Maybe this was about planting something else, something bigger than just apples, because sometimes, when someone tries to destroy you, they don't just end your story, they force you to write a new one. Still, even as I stood there, breathing in the silence, I wondered about Karen, where she went, what she was planning, whether she would ever come back. Because people like her, they don't just disappear, they wait, they plot, they return when you least expect it. And maybe one day I'd hear the sound of heels clicking across pavement again. Maybe one day I'd see her shadow at the edge of my land. But for now, I had won. For now, the land was mine again. For now, I was free. And as I looked out across the ruins of my orchard, I found myself asking a question I couldn't shake. If someone like Karen was finally stripped of her power, would you breathe easy and move on? Or would you always keep one eye open, waiting for the day she comes back for revenge?